Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of MSP 1337. I don't even know what show this is. I've got Omer with Lake Ridge. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Chris. Thank you for having me on.
So I'll just cut to the chase. I want to have a conversation about assessing, or I hate to use the word auditing because unless it's regulated, unless it's a legal thing, it's really about being assessed, right? And my experience has been limited to SOC 2. I've done some HIPAA compliance stuff over the years, and then now obviously I'm focused here at CompTIA on the Trustmark. Talk to me a little bit about your experiences having been both helping solution providers, your clients go through and map their current posture to a set of safeguards, and then what it looks like, when you have to come in and, put that assessing hat on. Obviously, you're probably not doing it for the same company. That might be a little bit of a conflict of interest, but like your experience has kind of been in both camps, correct?
Right. So we help MSPs, but we also help a lot of organizations seeking to become compliant with NIST 800-171. So we kind of do an assessment for them to see where they're currently at, and then to identify any kind of gaps. Then we come up with a plan to help remediate those gaps. So I think what's kind of interesting is a lot of companies, when we start, going through an assessment with them, you start to realize, how immature kind of their security programs are when it comes to documentation, overall, just, security control implementation. So a lot of times what they think is, they just got their like passwords on the computer, maybe they have like multi-factor on, they're like a cloud resource or two. So they think they're kind of like, they're
The
good to go
box
there.
checking.
Yeah, box checking. Yeah. So that's what they kind of think, but they don't have an overall um, culture of security at their organization, or if they do, it just stops at physical security, and that doesn't really extend to the whole logical, computer part of the security.
Do you think that's partially tied to what's tangible? Like I think about back in the day, I worked for a construction management company, and man, we implemented some pretty heavy camera and security protocols for doors, and basically to limit access to what was largely then paper copies of drawings and plans, right? So
Right.
that seemed like it, and even infrastructure, right? Like I remember the owners of the company, they're like, they wanted to see the servers in the cabinet in the server room, and so like we put glass windows in so they could see it, so they could
Right.
walk by and go, yep, that's our server infrastructure right there with the colored
Right.
lights and everything.
Yeah, so I think that's right. Yeah, a lot of it does have to do with it being like non-tangible,
Yeah.
I think a lot of it does also relate to folks not knowing how how deep the security like on a computer system can become, like on an information system. Like I think a lot of times they feel like it just kind of like stops at passwords, or just having maybe encryption on their drive or whatever. They're not actually aware of all the hundreds of security
Interesting.
you could configure actually on a Windows system, or like they're using Microsoft 365. They think it's completely secure out of the box, but they're not aware of all the other settings in the background that need to be turned on.
So you kind of identified two things there. So there's the security in general, the surface security. So it's kind of like the 100 miles wide and 1 inch deep, right? Like that.
Right.
When we think about how do I get into the environment, well, I put in my credentials. So they're conscious of that security, but
Right.
then not necessarily conscious of like, hey, I can't install an application after I logged in. It's like, well, yeah, because that's
Right.
dangerous.
So they don't really understand the danger behind, like just like they're just looking more for convenience, right? So, okay, we have a password to get into the computer. I have this important USB drive that I lock in the file cabinet. I think we're good to go. So they're not really aware of all the other security controls that are in place. And sometimes,
Or the why.
yeah, like they don't think about computer security the way they think about physical security.
Mm-hmm.
So, because like how you mentioned, it's like non-tangible. Um,
It's
And
more
then
likely that they
also,
would recognize the need to not piggyback on door entry, but then not understand why it's so critical that they not be able to install software after they've logged into their machine.
right, exactly, yeah. So I think part of it has to do with a lack of, security awareness training in general, like at a lot of companies. But starts from the top. Like if the management they're not aware of different computer security threats or things like that, then it's never going to filter down to the bottom. And also one thing we noticed with a lot of customers, like we've not had one customer that came to us to say, hey, how can you help us become more secure? It's
Yeah,
always, hey, there's this compliance requirement we have to
right.
meet. Like I literally just got off a call with a guy before this, and they have like something that they're trying to meet NIST 800-171 by like the end of the week.
Oh
They're coming
yeah.
to us. They're like, I was like, I don't think we can do that in a week. So like so it's just a general they see it as like cost on the business. They don't really see it as an investment. The same way how if you have like light bulbs burning in your office, you see that as a cost. Like they kind of see security like that too. So they like to not think about it. And the only time to think about it is if there's like a legal requirement.
Well, and I think that's fair, right? Like at the end of the day, we didn't go into business to be secure, right? We went into business
Right.
to make money. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the reality for most organizations is you did it because you saw an opportunity that was unique to what you were either already doing somewhere that you weren't happy, or you saw an opportunity to do something you've never done before, but figured this, I can make a living doing this.
Right. So
I
I think
think,
what's interesting. Oh yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Now, I was gonna say, like, kind of tying it back to like the whole, I guess the whole assessment topic is they actually appreciate the assessment because they start to realize like how, okay, right now we're in a really bad state. Like we're not, we have
Sure.
like, yeah, we have like no security or anything, but then they're happy to figure out that, okay, and like after the end of this plan of action, we're going to be a secure company. A lot of times, like they don't even have a very mature IT program, So when you have a security program that you're implementing for someone, a lot of times that also matures the entire IT program. Like, now they're starting to have like a ticket system, because they have to, you have to log things like, software installations, different things like that. Just the whole general process procedures being created, so the assessment actually ends up monetizing a lot of times and kind of formalizing their whole IT process, and they get the security. So generally, they're happy after they go through an assessment.
This gets into that you don't know what you don't know. Like we
Right.
to the original tangible part, yeah, they can understand that. But I think you said something earlier that I thought was interesting. So we've talked about the CompTIA Trustmark. We've talked about NIST 800-171. One of the things you said that, and this isn't to just plug the Trustmark, but largely the Trustmark is made up of CIS safeguards. And one of the things
Right.
that CIS is really good at is being very prescriptive. And you talked about, if only more frameworks would give more specific guidance to what needs to be done, we would start to see a larger connectedness of, oh, I connected the dots to satisfy
Right.
this safeguard. I need to improve my security posture, not how do I check the box so that I can move on.
Right. So one thing I do like about the cybersecurity trust mark from CompTIA is it's not focused on protecting like any particular category of data. So if we're dealing with HIPAA, it's about
Sure,
PHI, or if it's NIST 800-171, it's like we have this framework because we only care about protecting the control unclassified information or CUI.
sure,
Whereas like with the CompTIA Cybersecurity Trustmark, it's about creating a secure organization. So anytime an MSP would get, if they were to earn this trust mark, then it's like, whoever's using their services or whatever, they can be sure that, they have all the appropriate policies and procedures in place. And they have all the, not only the policies and procedures, but also the technical controls to
sure.
actually implement the different policies and procedures. Because now one thing, like let's say you're a company and, for you, like cybersecurity is important and you're looking to work with an MSP. A lot of times, like you're giving that MSP administrative access to your environment, whether they're
Right.
managing your servers or they're managing your Microsoft 365 tenant. So you might have all the security in the world, but then that MSP you're working with, doesn't have any security in place. So that's kind of like that's like a really big vulnerability for you. So if you work with someone that has something like the Trustmark, the cybersecurity Trustmark in place, then you're kind of you're in good hands. So then your own cybersecurity investment doesn't just go to waste.
So talk to me a little bit about, you've done assessing for both MSPs and their clients or your own clients.
Right.
Do you see a pattern with MSPs who want to get their house in order, but then when you look at their clients, it's like, hey, how do I achieve the maturity model that I want when I have clients that don't want to pay for services that put them in a level of confidence where I can now sleep at night. I mean, you mentioned a client to an MSP and how secure that they might be as far as their internal process, but then they bring in an MSP to manage 365 or manage servers, and they're not. So obviously you've got that path where it's like, well,
Right.
man, that makes you really want to consider like who the MSPs are that are providing services to you to ensure that. But what about the other way around? No one wants to get rid of a client that's paying them on a monthly basis, but how do you navigate that? Because I would think that part of my own maturity would be tied to the level of maturity I'm pushing towards with my clients.
Right. So one thing I noticed is a lot of times if an MSP, if they reach out to us for help with their own, cybersecurity and all that, what I noticed is the environments that they manage have like the minimal level of security in place because they themselves don't practice it.
Sure.
So what ends up happening is like that MSP's kind of bad habits and bad practices, they end up pushing that out to the client,
Sure.
or they kind of because they're kind of ignorant about it. And that's one thing I saw too. It's not that they're intentionally not secure. It's a lot of times they really are ignorant about how to secure their own IT environment,
Sure.
and this passes on to onto their own
Well,
customers.
well, MSPs didn't start out with an idea like, "Hey, we're going to sell security services and we're going to implement good
Right,
security services." And if we go back in time, the product stack that was included in what was
right,
required to do this well was, you counted it on one hand. You got AV, maybe you got next gen AV. We
right,
didn't talk about things like EDR and XDR and SIEM and SIM and SOAR and all these things that need to happen around. And MSPs don't need to be 35 employees, right? Like it could be a
right,
successful MSP, 3 to 5, doing a million plus. But when you look at the security services stack, there's a lot of myths around I have to bring all of this security, SOC, et cetera, into my own environment. I can't without to be successful. And those costs are, very much overwhelming and unrealistic for them to absorb. So they're like, well, what do I do? And they don't want to look at things like, well, you can outsource a lot of these
right.
services, and that's a fear factor, right? Because well, if I outsource it to someone that does this well, then they're going to take my clients away. And so, do you run into that?
Yeah. So because we have one of our apps is used by MSPs to provide cybersecurity consulting. So one reason like they sign up to use our solution is because they, like you said, they have like that gap in their own cybersecurity knowledge or their own internal practice.
Sure,
So they'd rather not lose their customer maybe to like another security service provider or someone like that. So they want to be able to show that they're also compliant themselves, like with NIST 800-171 in our case,
sure,
and also able to give the services. So yeah, a lot of times for an MSP, who kind of focuses more just on like IT kind of work rather than security work. Once their customer kind of figures out that they're not too strong in the security department, they kind of end up losing that customer. So
sure,
again, like if someone like that they had the trust mark, then it's also then they can also kind of present because they're going to do the work themselves, to get this trust
yeah.
mark, implementation, all that. So they can also then advertise themselves as like a cybersecurity service provider. They're not just stuck in IT because now they have the cybersecurity knowledge that they gain through the experience of getting the trust mark.
So
So
it's
it's a good
interesting.
way to it's a
It's
good way to
interesting that you
retain
said.
customers as
Oh,
well.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm saying it's a good way for them to also be able to retain customers and also gain their own confidence that
Yeah.
they're able to provide security services.
So let me ask you a question. I feel like there's an opportunity here. Like if I look back in time, 4 or 5 years, the average MSP probably didn't use acronyms like GRC. Not that they didn't exist,
Right,
but they really didn't exist for us. Like the MSP was largely abandoned, if you will, when it comes to managing things like risk registers or looking at frameworks as a way to manage IT infrastructure. Just for some reason, it just never really seemed to click with the majority. But
right,
now we're seeing, as as frameworks mature, like, I mean, you go back 5 years and it was frameworks didn't come out with updates on a very frequent basis. And we're seeing like, ITIL now coming out with version, I think it's version 4. And you've got some of these other frameworks that are having major updates, even NIST CSF with 1.1 now in draft for version 2, and adding a significant number of controls and safeguards, that there's enough of an awareness from a client perspective to say, hey, an MSP is no longer in this boat of like, yeah, you can't sell it because no one wants to buy it. When the reality is, if you're using a framework to define how you go after posture of cybersecurity, maturing that cybersecurity, you've got a roadmap, right? Like it's no longer like, I just want to get more money. It's, I want to be able to do everything that I can within reason. And we're aligning with framework, fill in the blank. And quite honestly, I don't care which one you pick. They all have their pros and cons. They all have their strengths and weaknesses, if you will. But the reality is, if you follow the guidance, the intent behind the framework, you should be pretty successful in a security posture that makes sense, that gives you confidence, allows you to sleep at night, those kind of things. Is that safe?
Yeah, I think that's accurate to say. I mean, if you line yourself up with a framework, a lot of times what happens is like, let's say we have customers that they had these NIST 800 171 requirements. So they implemented that. Then, some other customer, they have like, let's say ISO 27001, like they want the customer to have that.
Sure.
And because they've already done this one framework, now it's very easy to become compliant with another framework, because a lot of times they cover the same topics. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you have a framework that you've chosen and you're following, and you implement that, then it's easy to manage your cybersecurity program. It's easy to assess yourself, see where you're at. And also if you have some kind of other business opportunity that comes up, but is also tied to, some level of security requirements that you have to have.
Sure.
It could even be like a vendor form, like vendors, like someone they want to become a vendor for Raytheon or some
Yeah.
business, or whatever, like they have to always fill out these forms, like, are we doing these certain security requirements. But if you can just say, hey, we're attesting that we do, like we have the CompTIA Cybersecurity Trustmark, for example, we have
Yeah.
this certification, then that's something that you can send to someone and say, hey, our organization takes security serious. We're following this framework. They can look up the framework. They can see what
Right.
you're doing.
That's always useful, right? Like, if is it
Yeah,
something that I can go Google and have it come back with it exists, like whether
yeah,
it's
exactly.
CGIS or yeah, any number of. So, is there any one framework that you say is just super like crazy complicated, that's just overwhelmingly like, maybe don't start with that one?
Hmm. I mean, I would say for a lot of folks, like NIST 800 171, it's pretty has a lot of requirements. I would
Yeah.
say if you're just getting started out with your own kind of like, setting up your own little
A starting point.
like a starting point, I wouldn't start with something that has like 100 controls, like 800 171 or something like that. But
Maybe
now,
something more like CIS 18 IG1, and just
yeah,
get
like
a.
that, yeah. Or there's like FAR 52 204. I think it was 21 was there's like these FAR requirements,
Sure.
so like that has just like 15 security controls. So I would start out with something like that, or even they have the UK Cyber Essentials.
Yeah.
There's a lot of documentation for that online. Like that's a good start, to it's not that complicated. So something like that. That's what I'd recommend.
And it
Um,
makes it sound like you're also promoting the Trustmark. So Trustmark is
but this is what I would say about the Trustmark,
yeah,
because I've
tell
worked
us.
with a bunch of different frameworks.
Yeah.
Like I feel like the security controls are, I like how they're broken out. So they're more specific compared to something like 800, this 853 or 171, where
Sure.
it's kind of more vague, like what they're looking for. So with the Trustmark, like the requirements are broken out. They're more easy to understand. Another like big advantage with the Trustmark. So if you pick something like HIPAA or NIST 800 171, it's more concerned about protecting like certain data types, whereas Trustmark, it's more about an overall culture of security at your organization. So that's what I like about it. The CompTIA Security Trustmark. Then obviously, a lot of people like yeah, MSPs, obviously everyone's familiar with like getting their CompTIA A plus or their CompTIA Security Trust or CompTIA Security Plus or whatever. So if you go apply for a job and they're like, they look for certifications like CompTIA certifications. If you think about it, you're trying to get a customer, as an MSP, like isn't it, it's kind of like you're applying for a job too. So don't you want to also have a CompTIA certification for your business?
Sure.
Because CompTIA, it's very reputable and everyone knows about it, everyone's heard about it. Um, so like you could go out and say, oh, we've implemented, so and so framework, but there's no third party to verify it. Like
Sure.
there's no like marketing you can really do with that because you're just claiming something. But if you get like the trust mark, then it's like, you have the CompTIA logo on your site,
So
just
third party validation is really
the third
important.
party validation. And again, like, when you got your slide deck, you're doing your proposal to someone,
Yeah.
doing your pitch there, then you got also that CompTIA logo.
Nice. So let me ask you a question. And I probably haven't looked as closely at some of these frameworks as you have, as you were sharing. But one of the things that I've noticed a pattern for is there's not a lot of clarity around the expectations of employee training. So yeah, it talks about training from the standpoint of like security
Right.
awareness, like you fill in the blank with a different vendor for whatever it is, proof point, know before. There's lots of them in there. But getting into more of the skills training, like, hey, you're just going after this framework, show us some evidence that your employees that are providing these services or are implementing these controls, do they have the skill set that's required to be successful with that? I know, like, if you're a Cisco shop, just saying like we do Cisco switches, but having nobody on your team that can do this without Googling each command that they need to type in at the command line, well, that's not the skills the department that you necessarily would want.
Right.
You probably aren't going to see a security posture for sure in those arenas. What's your experience like? Are there some frameworks better than others? Do any of them really give that direction?
Yeah, so I would say, for example, with this day 171, it talks about general security awareness training for employees,
Sure.
but also a specific control that requires, that staff are like, especially, IT or security staff, they're actually trained on things like, let's say you have Cisco switches, like you mentioned, like they actually receive training on how to manage those types of things.
Gotcha.
But what I've seen is like most frameworks don't really have that. But that is an important element to have. Like if you have a training program, it's not just about training users on, um, what might be a malicious email or something like that.
Right.
A lot of times, like the threat does come from the system admins. Like someone, they don't have proper training on the equipment, or they're not properly trained on how to actually, you know, like maybe they shouldn't even be a privileged user because they're not
Right.
aware of how to handle an account, like responsibly use an account like that.
This
So
goes
I'm
right
not,
back to the physical. I mean, you think about like
yeah,
OSHA, right? Like you have to know how to use the machine that could like cut your arm off, and like you go through special
right.
training to properly operate that piece of machinery. But we don't necessarily see that get translated into the sort of intangible space.
No, not at all. No. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's kind of funny because like if you had someone using a like an excavator or something, you wouldn't just have anyone use an excavator, like at
No,
the construction site. They have to undergo training or have a license or something.
that is privileged access right there.
Yeah, to have an excavator.
Yeah.
But like I guess in the cybersecurity space, then a lot of times this kind of isn't really considered. So like one thing I recommend to some customers is like, whoever is kind of managing your environment, they should at least have some kind of certification. Like if they got like, for example, like the
Some way
security,
to validate they have that experience and
and
expertise.
like if they got, for example, like the security plus certification, then they've at least they know about maybe how a firewall rules should be configured, because I remember
Right.
like in the exam, like you actually have to do that.
Right.
uh, so that's what I recommend like to businesses is like at least have like staff that have some kind of
Gotcha.
certification, um or like if they can take a vendor specific course for the equipment
Sure.
there.
I often encourage vendor specific, especially if you're working for an MSP that probably doesn't do like 9 different vendor firewalls. It might make sense
Yeah.
to be, somewhat certified on one or two of the vendors that you do use.
Right.
We've got a few minutes left. Talk to me a little bit about that starting point. We talked about it a little bit at the beginning. Um, if you were to just give general advice, where do you tell people to start? Because obviously starting with an assessment, that can be very valuable, but at the same time, if you recognize that you're not very mature with your
Right.
cybersecurity posture, where would you send them?
So a lot of times, like if we're working with a customer, and we can just tell in like 5 or 10 minutes, how mature their program is. We
Sure.
can say, okay, there's no information security policy. They don't have these types of group policies configured, or
Yeah.
point manager configuration profiles. Like we just stop the assessment and we say,
Okay.
all right, let's just start with governance here. Like let's figure out who's going to be responsible for everything. Let's establish our policies and procedures.
Yeah.
Then what we do is, so we help them set all that stuff up. Then the next part is like implementing, various technical controls, whether it's like CIS benchmarks
Sure.
or DISA sticks or whatever.
Do it in bite-sized pieces, if you
Yeah,
will.
we do it like that, and then we make sure like all the staff are trained, everybody's properly trained. Then we're like, all right, let's go back, let's do the assessment, and let's see what if we missed anything.
Got
Because
it.
like you said, it's kind
I
of like
like
you
that.
go, yeah, because you don't want to waste people's time. Like it's like you're kind of going to the dentist, and they're like, oh man, you got cavities and this and that, and you just like leave it there. So it's kind of
Right.
makes more sense to like help the customer first, establish a
Get
mature
get
cyber.
rid of the cavities and then do an overall. Yeah, well, now we're gonna do teeth whitening.
Yeah, like it just makes more sense to do that. So like
Got
kind of
it.
help establish their program first and then do an assessment to see like are they missing something now, against like a certain framework or whatever.
I
Um
like it.
yeah.
Well, there you have it. We have hit the end of our time. Omar, great having you on the show. I really appreciate your insights. Lakeridge.us if you want to find out more about what they do over there. And for those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.